My husband forbade me from going to the basement for 10 years. That's my workshop. I never went down. But yesterday, he left for a business trip, and I heard a child crying from below. When I broke the lock, welcome back, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Looking back now, I can see that the marriage I thought I had never really existed, but for a long time, a long, quiet, ordinary time, I believed in it completely. Daniel and I met in 2011 at a mutual friend's barbecue in Columbus, Ohio. He was charming in that low-key, reliable way that women are told to look for. He didn't perform. He just was. He asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. By the end of that summer, we were inseparable. And by 2013, we were married in a small ceremony in my mother's backyard under a rented arch wrapped in white roses. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. For the first few years, things were good. We bought a house in a quiet suburb of Columbus, a wide 2-story colonial with a front porch and a half-acre of yard. Daniel worked in logistics management. I did freelance graphic design from a converted sunroom. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We had a dog, a yellow lab named Biscuit. We had a neighborhood and a routine. We had, I thought, each other. The basement was his from the beginning. That was the deal, presented before we even moved in. I need a space, he said simply. A workshop. Somewhere I can decompress. I thought nothing of it. Plenty of men have workshops. My own father had one, full of half-finished birdhouses and old power tools that smelled like sawdust and motor oil. I said yes without hesitation, and he put a deadbolt on the door that same week. For years, the basement was simply a fact of our life, like the creaky third stair or the way the kitchen faucet dripped in winter. I heard the occasional sound of movement below, footsteps, the drag of something heavy, the low murmur of what I assumed was a radio or podcast. I never questioned it. I trusted him. But trust, I've learned, can be a kind of blindness. The first signal I should have noticed came in the spring of 2019. I went to pay our water bill online and noticed it had nearly doubled over 3 months. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he said he'd been using the utility sink in the basement to rinse equipment. Big project, he said. He didn't look up from his phone. I accepted it. The second signal came that fall. I was dropping a load of laundry and noticed a grocery bag sitting by the basement door. Not the kind of bag you carry tools in. It held 2 small cartons of whole milk, a box of animal crackers, and a children's multivitamin. I stood there staring at it for a long moment. When Daniel came home, I asked about it. He said he'd been using the milk for protein shakes, and that the crackers and vitamins were for a co-worker's kid whose lunch he'd picked up by mistake. He looked me directly in the eyes when he said it. His voice didn't waver. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. The third signal was harder to explain away. In January of this year, I was working late in the sunroom when I thought I heard, drifting up faintly through the floor vents, a sound. A small, high-pitched sound. I told myself it was the pipes. Old houses make strange sounds. I went to bed. Then came the night that changed everything. Daniel left on a Tuesday morning for what he said was a 4-day logistics conference in Pittsburgh. He kissed me on the cheek. Not the lips, I noticed that. And wheeled his suitcase to the car. I stood on the porch and watched him go. The house felt the way it always felt when he was away, a little lighter, which I had never let myself examine too closely. I spent the day working, cooking, watching television. By 10 o'clock, I was reading in bed. The house was still. And then I heard it. It came up through the floor, through the vents, through the walls, through the very bones of the house. A child crying. Not a television, not a pipe. Not the wind finding a gap in the siding. A real child, small and frightened, crying steadily in the dark somewhere below me. I sat up so fast the book fell off the bed. I told myself, I actually stood there at the top of the basement stairs and told myself that I was mistaken, that I was tired or anxious or half asleep. I stood with my hand on the doorknob for a full minute, listening. The crying didn't stop. It was quiet, exhausted, rhythmic. The cry of a child who had been crying for a long time. I went to the kitchen and got a flathead screwdriver from the utility drawer. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. Some cold, clear part of me had already decided. It took me 4 minutes to work the screwdriver behind the strike plate and pop the door open. The stairs were dark. I found the switch. The light came on, and I walked down. The basement was not a workshop. There was a workbench along one wall, yes, a real one, with tools hung on pegboard, but it was clearly decorative, a prop. The rest of the space told a different story entirely. Against the far wall was a toddler bed with a blue fitted sheet and a small pillow printed with cartoon trucks. Beside it, a plastic bin of toys. Blocks, a stuffed rabbit, a set of plastic dinosaurs. A portable space heater glowed orange in the corner. A folding table held a baby monitor, the kind with a camera, its green power light blinking steadily. A changing pad. A stack of diapers. A row of small folded shirts, tiny jeans, pairs of sneakers barely bigger than my fist. And in the toddler bed, sitting up now, staring at me with enormous wet eyes, was a little boy. He looked about 2 years old. Dark hair, flushed cheeks, his face tracked with tears. He was wearing a onesie printed with fire trucks. He stared at me for a moment, then said, with absolute seriousness, "Hungry." I don't know how I stayed standing. I went to him. I sat on the edge of the bed. I said very quietly, "Hi, buddy. It's okay." He studied my face, apparently decided I was acceptable, and held out his arms. I picked him up. He was warm and solid and smelled like a child. Talcum and sleep and something sweet. He put his head on my shoulder and stopped crying. I sat there, holding this child, this small, real, undeniable child, in the basement of my own home, and I understood with terrible clarity that my entire married life had been constructed around a lie. The monitor on the table. That's why Daniel always had his phone with him. That's why he went downstairs to the workshop every single evening. That's why the water bill had doubled. That's why there were animal crackers by the door. How long? I didn't know yet. The boy looked about 2, which meant this had started. Some version of it, at least 3 years ago. 3 years of a child living, part-time, in my basement. A child I had never known about. A child whose mother I didn't know. A child my husband had looked me in the eye and hidden from me every single day. I took the boy upstairs. I fed him crackers and milk from the refrigerator. He ate with great concentration, both hands on the cup. I sat at the kitchen table across from him and looked at my own hands and tried to think. The fear came in waves. Not fear of Daniel, exactly. Not yet. Fear of what this meant. Fear of the architecture of the lie, how vast and load-bearing it must have been to hold this long. Fear of what I didn't know, which was almost everything. But beneath the fear, something else. Something harder. I was 41 years old. I had built my adult life around this man. I had forgone things. Career opportunities, relationships, the children I'd wanted and he'd kept deferring. On the basis of a marriage that apparently did not exist in the form I believed it did. I was sitting in my own kitchen, holding crackers out to another woman's child, in a house I had half paid for, in a life I had half invented. No, not fear. Fury. And underneath the fury resolve. I was not going to panic. I was not going to call Daniel screaming. I was not going to do anything that could be used against me later, because I already understood, with the cold clarity of someone who had just had everything stripped away at once, that there would be a later. There would be lawyers. There would be proceedings. There would be a record of everything I did from this moment forward. So I thought carefully. First, the child. He needed to be safe and cared for tonight. He didn't know me. He wasn't frightened of me, but he didn't know me. I looked at the baby monitor. Daniel could conceivably be watching the feed remotely. I unplugged it. Then I took a photo of it, still plugged in, before I did. Evidence. Second, I photographed the basement. Every inch. The toddler bed, the toys, the diapers, the folded clothes, the space heater, the monitor, the little shoes. I took 47 photographs with my phone, time-stamped, geotagged. Third, I called my sister Claire in Cincinnati. It was nearly midnight. She answered on the second ring. "I need you to come," I said. "Tonight, and I need you to bring your car." She didn't ask questions. She said, "I'm leaving in 20 minutes. Fourth, I needed to know whose child this was. He couldn't tell me his last name. He was 2. But I looked at him, really looked, and I saw Daniel's jaw, Daniel's dark brows, Daniel's particular way of furrowing his forehead when he was thinking. This child was Daniel's son. That wasn't a question, which meant somewhere there was a woman who was this child's mother. And she apparently knew about the basement. She had allowed this arrangement, or had been coerced into it, or worse, didn't know he was here at all. That last thought made me feel physically ill. By the time Claire's headlights swept across the front windows at 1:47 a.m., I had a list. Not a revenge list. I had no interest in revenge. A list of what I needed. A family attorney, a child welfare professional, documentation, and the truth. In that order. The boy had fallen asleep on the couch, biscuit curled against his feet. I opened the door for my sister. She looked at the sleeping child and then at me. "Start from the beginning," she said. I did. Claire stayed the night. We didn't sleep. We sat at the kitchen table with tea going cold between us, and I told her everything. The water bill, the grocery bag, the years of closed doors. While the little boy slept on the couch under a fleece blanket that had always lived on the back of the armchair, and that I now could not look at the same way. "Do you know his name?" Claire asked. "He told me Leo when I asked," I said. "That's all I have." By 6 in the morning, I had made 2 decisions. First, I would not call Daniel. Not yet. Every conversation with him from this point forward was either a trap or an opportunity, and I needed to know which before I opened my mouth. Second, I needed a family law attorney before Daniel came home from Pittsburgh, or wherever he actually was. I called my doctor's office when they opened at 8. Not for an appointment, but because my physician, Dr. Renata Osei, had once mentioned her college roommate was a family law attorney in Columbus. I left a message explaining it was urgent. Dr. Osei called me back herself within the hour. She gave me a name, Patricia Hume, of Hume and Associates on North High Street. "She's the best I know," Renata said. "Tell her I sent you." I called Patricia Hume's office at 8:45. Her assistant put me through by 9:10. I sat at the kitchen table. Claire was upstairs with Leo, keeping him occupied with the plastic dinosaurs from the basement bin, which I had brought up along with a change of clothes. And I explained the situation in a level voice to a woman I had never met. Patricia Hume did not express shock. She expressed focus. "Do not disturb anything else in the basement," she said. Do not contact your husband. Don't delete texts. Don't look through his email on a shared device. Don't move money. I need to see those photographs. Can you be in my office at 2 o'clock? I was in her office at 2 o'clock. While I was preparing to leave, Daniel called. My phone buzzed on the counter, his name on the screen, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. Not dread, not guilt, not that old reflexive anxiety I used to feel when he was displeased. Nothing. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 20 minutes later. I let that go too. The third time, I texted back, busy. Call you tonight. Simple. Normal. The kind of text I might send on any ordinary day. What I didn't know then, but would learn later, was that when Daniel checked the baby monitor remotely from Pittsburgh, or wherever he was, he found the feed offline. That was when he called the first time. By the third call, he was already in his car. Patricia Hume's office was on the second floor of a brick building near the Short North. She was a compact, precise woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of stillness that made you feel immediately that you were in capable hands. She reviewed my photographs on my phone without changing expression. She asked about the child. She asked whether I had contacted Child Protective Services. Not yet, I said. I wanted to speak with you first. That was the right call, she said. Here is the situation. You have a child of unknown legal status in your home. You have documented evidence of a concealed living space for that child. You have a husband who will return and who does not yet know what you know. We need to move quickly and carefully. She folded her hands. The moment you retained me, I became your advocate. Everything you tell me is privileged. Tell me everything. I did. The first concrete piece of evidence, beyond my photographs, came from Patricia herself that same afternoon. She had a paralegal run a background search on our property and Daniel's financial records as part of standard pre-filing discovery prep. What came back within the hour stopped both of us cold. Daniel Calloway had been paying rent on an apartment in Clintonville, a neighborhood 15 minutes from our house, for 3 years and 4 months. The lease was in the name of a woman named Sandra Voss. Cross-referenced with public records, Sandra Voss had given birth to a son, Leonard James Voss, 26 months ago at Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital. The father listed on the birth certificate was Daniel Aaron Calloway. I sat in that chair and read the name Leonard James Voss and felt the room tilt slightly. Leo. His name was Leo. Daniel had a son. He had a son and an apartment and a woman and a parallel life. And he had been running it simultaneously with our marriage for at least 3 years. And some portion of that time, he had been keeping his son, his toddler, in our basement when Sandra presumably needed time alone or was working, or God only knew what arrangement they had built that required a child to sleep in a basement without his mother's knowledge or consent, or with it. I didn't know yet. That not knowing was its own kind of horror. Is this enough? I asked Patricia. She looked at me with the calmly serious expression of someone who has heard everything and is still standing. For divorce proceedings, yes, she said. For what comes next, we may need more. But Ms. Calloway. She paused. You need to understand that when your husband comes home and finds that basement empty and that door unlocked, this situation will escalate. Are you prepared for that? I thought of Leo asleep on my couch with Biscuit at his feet. I thought of 10 years. I thought of the pearl earrings I wore at my wedding. Yes, I said, I'm prepared. Patricia and I spent the rest of that afternoon building the framework of what came next. She filed a formal petition for divorce that same day, Wednesday, on grounds of marital fraud and abandonment of disclosure. The filing was time-stamped at 4:52 p.m. She also contacted a colleague at Columbus Children's Services to report the situation regarding Leo, carefully and accurately. A child had been found unsupervised in a residential basement. The child had been cared for overnight. The biological father was the legal homeowner's husband. Children's Services opened a case within 2 hours. I drove home with Claire's car following mine, Leo in the back seat of her vehicle in a borrowed car seat, still working methodically through a sleeve of crackers. I had 3 hours before Daniel's estimated arrival, based on the drive from Pittsburgh. I used them well. I gathered every financial document in the house: tax returns, bank statements, the mortgage paperwork, both our insurance policies, and photographed every page. I boxed up Daniel's personal items from the bedroom with the detached efficiency of someone packing for a stranger. I did not cry. I was not ready to cry. Crying was for later, when this was over. He arrived at 6:17 p.m. I heard his car in the driveway. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, Claire beside me. Leo had been taken by a Children's Services caseworker 2 hours earlier, a gentle, competent woman named Ms. Trotter, who had knelt down to his level and produced a small, stuffed elephant from her bag, which Leo had accepted with immediate suspicion and eventual delight. I had watched him go, that small, dark-haired boy, and felt something I still don't have a precise word for. Grief, maybe. Anger on his behalf. A sorrow that had nothing to do with me. Daniel walked through the front door and stopped. He registered Claire first, then the expression on my face, then, through the open door at the end of the hall, the basement stairway. The door standing open, the light on. The change in him was instantaneous. The mask dropped so fast it was almost physical, like watching a trap door open. Every bit of the careful, reasonable, attentive man I had married simply vacated his face, and what was left was something cold and calculating that I recognized, in retrospect, as his actual self. "Meg," he said. "Sit down, Daniel," I said. He didn't sit. "Where is he?" "He's safe. Children's Services has him." I kept my voice level. "Sandra Voss has been notified." Something moved through his expression. Anger, calculation, fear, cycling through too quickly to name. "You had no right," he began. "I had every right," I said. "He was in my house, alone, crying." I paused. "For how long, Daniel? How long had you been bringing him here?" He shifted. I watched him construct an approach. He was good at it. I had watched him do it for a decade without recognizing it for what it was. "This is more complicated than it looks," he said. He sat down across from me. His voice gentled. The charm came back up, like a light being switched on. "Sandra has some issues, Meg. She needed support, and Patricia Hume filed for divorce at 4:52 this afternoon," I said. "On grounds of marital fraud. You'll receive the paperwork at your place of employment by tomorrow morning." The gentleness dropped again. "You went to a lawyer. It wasn't a question." "Yes, Meg." His voice shifted again. Lower, now. Something that was trying to be a threat without quite committing to one. "You need to think very carefully about what you're doing. We have a mortgage. We have joint accounts. If you want to make this illegal..." "It already is a legal matter," I said. "The moment you put a child in my basement without my knowledge, it became a legal matter." Claire hadn't moved. She sat with her hands around her mug, watching him the way you watch something unpredictable. He stood up. "You're going to regret this." He said it quietly, which was worse than if he'd shouted. "Sandra and we're not going to make this easy for you. You want to fight, fine. But you are not going to take my son from me. And you are not going to take this house. And you are going to discover very quickly that you don't know as much as you think you do." "I know about the Clintonville apartment," I said. "I know about the birth certificate. I know about the 3 years of rent you paid out of our joint savings account. I picked up my coffee. My hand was steady. I think I know quite enough. He left. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Claire and I sat in the ringing silence. You were incredible, she said. I was terrified, I said. There's a difference. But it was over, the first round at least, and I was still standing. I took 4 days after that. Claire stayed with me. We watched old movies. We cooked elaborate dinners we didn't finish. Biscuit slept between us on the couch. I returned Patricia's calls and answered her emails, but I did not do anything beyond what was required. I let myself be tired. I let myself feel the weight of what had been taken from me. A decade, a belief, a version of my own life, without pushing it away. And then, on the 5th morning, I got up before Claire was awake, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the sun coming through the east windows, and opened my laptop. I had work to do. The temptation came on a Saturday, 9 days after Daniel walked out. It arrived not as a threat this time, but as an offer, which in retrospect was more insulting. Daniel had been communicating exclusively through his attorney, a man named Garrett Phelps, who sent long, carefully worded emails implying, without quite stating, that my aggressive legal posture was creating unnecessary hardship for all parties involved. I forwarded each one to Patricia without reading them twice. But on that Saturday morning, it wasn't Garrett Phelps who called. It was Daniel himself, from a number I didn't recognize. Probably a new phone, I thought, so I'd pick up. I almost didn't. But Patricia had told me, if he makes direct contact, document it. I answered. I don't want to fight, he said. His voice had that quality I used to find reassuring. Measured, sincere sounding, the voice of a man who had never, in 10 years, raised it at me. Now, I heard the mechanism in it, the careful calibration. I want to talk, that's all. Everything goes through our attorneys, Daniel. This is separate from the legal process. A pause. Sandra and I talked. We think there's an arrangement that works for everyone. You keep the house, full title, no contest. I transfer my portion of the mortgage debt. In exchange, you withdraw the fraud complaint and we settle privately, no court involvement. I sat with the phone against my ear and looked out the kitchen window at the yard, where Biscuit was sniffing the fence line. The offer was not nothing. The house was worth $400,000, half the mortgage paid off, no litigation, clean, fast, and it was designed perfectly. Designed for a frightened woman who wanted it to be over, who wanted to take the money and the house and close the door on the whole nightmare and pretend it had never happened. That woman might have existed 3 weeks ago. She didn't exist anymore. No, I said. A beat. Meg, the fraud complaint stays. The proceedings continue. Everything through Patricia Hume. I paused. Don't call this number again. I hung up. Then I made coffee and sat with it for a while, watching Biscuit patrol the yard. And I noticed that my hands were completely steady. The fear that had lived in my chest like a stone since Tuesday night, since the moment I'd heard that crying, had shifted into something else. Not courage, exactly. Something quieter than courage. Certainty. I knew what I was doing. And I knew why. That same week, Patricia mentioned a support group. I resisted the idea at first. I am private by nature, not inclined to share my worst moments with strangers in a church basement. But Patricia said simply, you need people who understand what this kind of betrayal actually is. Not people who love you because they'll be too angry. People who've lived it. The group met on Thursday evenings at a community center in Bexley. 7 women ranging in age from their early 30s to their late 50s. The woman who ran it was named Donna, a therapist who had also, 15 years ago, discovered her husband's second family. She had the quality of someone who had burned entirely down and rebuilt from the foundation, and was neither bitter about the burning nor falsely cheerful about the rebuilding. I told my story, all of it. The basement, Leo, the birth certificate, the apartment in Clintonville. The women listened without interrupting. When I finished, no one said, "I can't believe it," or "How could he?" They just nodded with the slow recognition of people who understand that the unbelievable happens regularly to ordinary people in ordinary houses. A woman named Karen, mid-40s, a pediatric nurse, had discovered her ex-husband's hidden family through a Venmo transaction. A woman named Phyllis had found a second cell phone in a jacket pocket. A woman named Rose, who sat in the corner and didn't speak much, had eventually said quietly, "Mine had a whole other house, not an apartment, a house." None of us had chosen the wrong man because we were stupid. We had chosen carefully, loved well, and been lied to with great skill. Those are different things. After the meeting, Donna took me aside. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I said, "most of the time." "That's because you're in action," she said. "Action is protective. When there's nothing to do is when it gets hard." I thought about that on the drive home. She was right. As long as there were steps to take, I could take them. As long as there was a proceeding and a strategy and a next thing, I could move. It was the moments of stillness, late at night, or when I passed the closed basement door, that the grief came up, raw and enormous, and I had to simply sit with it until it receded. On Friday, Patricia called with new information. Sandra Voss, it turned out, had engaged her own attorney. She was not, as I had feared, a passive party in all this. Or at least, that was no longer her posture. Her attorney had made contact with Patricia to indicate that Sandra had documentation of her own, text records, financial transfers, a custody arrangement that Daniel had made verbally with her that he had subsequently violated repeatedly by taking Leo without her consent. Sandra Voss, I began to understand, was as much Daniel's victim as I was. Different victimization, different shape, but the same fundamental thing. A woman who had trusted Daniel Calloway and been lied to in the specific way that served him. That understanding didn't make me feel kinship, exactly. Not yet. But it made the picture clearer, and a clear picture, I had learned, was the most useful thing in the world. I should have anticipated that Daniel's mother would get involved. Looking back, it seems obvious. Margaret Calloway Sr., Marge, to her friends, which I had never quite been, had always been the architecture behind her son's image. She was a tall, composed woman in her late 60s, a retired school principal with a gift for making condescension feel like wisdom. She had never been warm to me. She had never been actively hostile either. She existed in that precise middle distance that made her impossible to address directly because there was nothing to point to. They arrived on a Sunday afternoon without calling. I was in the backyard with Biscuit when I heard the front doorbell. Claire had gone back to Cincinnati. She had a job and a family and couldn't stay indefinitely. And I was alone. I came through the house and opened the door and found them both on the porch. Daniel, in a gray jacket I recognized, his expression carefully arranged into something approximating contrition, and Marge, in a blue coat, holding a ceramic dish covered in foil. She held it out. "I made a casserole," she said, as if that explained everything. I stood in the doorway and thought, don't let them in. But I was raised by a mother who taught me that you do not turn people away from your door, and that reflex is deep. I stepped back. I should not have stepped back. They came in, I did not offer to take the casserole. Marge set it on the counter. We stood in the kitchen, standing, all three of us, which was its own kind of signal, no one pretending this was a social visit. "Meg," Daniel said, "I owe you an apology." He said it with complete conviction. That was the terrifying thing. He could still do that. He could still look me in the eye, after everything, and produce sincerity like a coin from his pocket. 10 years of practice, I supposed. "Go ahead," I said. "I handled things badly." He paused. "I got into a situation that I didn't manage well, and I should have been honest with you. I understand you're angry. I understand why you went to an attorney." Another pause. Calibrated. "But Meg, what's happening now is going to hurt everyone. The fraud complaint, the custody involvement. It's going to drag on for months, cost both of us money we don't have, and at the end of it, we'll both have less than we started with." He looked at me steadily. "Is that really what you want?" "I want the truth in front of a judge," I said. "That's what I want." Marge stepped in then. She was better at it than he was, smoother, more maternal, with a quality of disappointed love that she deployed like a scalpel. "Sweetheart," she said, which she had never called me in 10 years of being her daughter-in-law. "I know you've been hurt. No one is saying you haven't. But you're making permanent decisions in a moment of pain, and those always lead to regret." She set her hands on the counter. "Daniel has a son, a little boy who needs his father. And this proceeding, it's going to make it harder for that child to have stability." She paused. "Is that the kind of woman you want to be?" There it was. Is that the kind of woman you want to be? The oldest manipulation in the book. Make the wronged party responsible for the consequences of the wrong. I felt the pull of it. Not because I believed it, but because I had spent 10 years in a household where that particular form of logic was the water I swam in. The instinct to accommodate, to be reasonable, to not be the difficult one. It rose up like a physical reflex. I let it rise, and I let it pass. "Marge," I said, "a child was kept in my basement without my knowledge. My husband has maintained a second household for 3 years, financed with money from our joint account, while lying to my face every day. I am not going to be spoken to about the kind of woman I want to be." I looked at Daniel. "Your attorney will hear from Patricia Hume Monday morning. I'd like you both to leave now." Daniel's composure cracked, just slightly, just for a second. Something moved behind his eyes that wasn't anger exactly, more like recalibration, like someone adjusting a calculation. "You think this is going to go the way you're planning," he said, and the careful gentleness was gone entirely. "It isn't. I have documentation too, Meg. I have records. Our finances are more complicated than you realize. You're going to spend 2 years in litigation and come out the other side with nothing but legal fees and a very clear understanding of why you should have taken the deal." He said it without heat, which was the point. A prediction, not a threat. The kind of thing you say when you believe it. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said. Marge picked up the casserole on the way out. That detail, for some reason, made me want to laugh. She had come prepared to make peace, and she was leaving with her dish, which she would presumably eat herself or throw away. The gesture had failed, and she was reclaiming her prop. The door closed. The lock clicked. I stood in the kitchen and felt the fear. Real, physical, a cold current moving through my chest. He said he had records. He said our finances were complicated. What did he know that I didn't? What had he hidden that he now intended to weaponize? But even as the fear moved through me, something happened that I hadn't expected. It didn't stop me. It didn't make me want to call Patricia and withdraw. Instead, It made everything sharper. The fear and the resolve were the same feeling, just seen from different angles. He was afraid too. That's why he'd come. That's why he'd brought his mother with a casserole. People who are winning don't bring casseroles. They don't make offers. They don't show up unannounced to appeal to your better nature. He was afraid of what I knew, and he should be. I called Patricia and left a voicemail describing the visit in full. Then I made dinner, fed Biscuit, and sat by the window until it was dark. I was ready for whatever came next. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in late March, 11 weeks after the night I broke open the basement door. Patricia had spent those 11 weeks building what she called a complete picture. That meant financial forensics, a certified accountant who combed through 6 years of joint statements and found $47,000 moved out of our savings in irregular increments, all traceable to the Clintonville apartment. It meant depositions from Sandra Voss, who had by this point fully engaged her own attorney and had significant grievances of her own against Daniel. It meant the testimony of Ms. Trotter from Children's Services, who had documented the basement in official photographs taken the morning after I called. It meant the birth certificate, the lease, the baby monitor, and 47 photographs from my phone, all admitted as exhibits. It also, unexpectedly, meant a woman named Claire Hendricks, no relation to my sister, who was Daniel's co-worker and who had been uncomfortable for 2 years with things she had seen and heard, and who, when contacted by Patricia's paralegal, turned out to be very willing to make a statement. I wore a dark blue blazer to the hearing. I sat at the table beside Patricia, and I looked straight ahead, and I waited. Daniel sat across the room with Garrett Phelps, who was a competent attorney working with an incompetent set of facts. Daniel was dressed well. He always dressed well. And he had the bearing of a man who intended to get through this with his dignity intact. He didn't look at me. That was the tell. In 10 years of marriage, even in arguments, Daniel had always looked at me. He had always held eye contact, because eye contact was part of the performance. Avoiding it now meant the performance had collapsed. The judge was a woman in her 50s named the Honorable Teresa Buckley. She reviewed the exhibits with the brisk efficiency of someone who had seen many variations of this story and was interested in the specifics, not the general shape. Garrett Phelps presented Daniel's case. The framing was complicated personal circumstances, no intent to deceive, financial transfers made for child support purposes which were arguably Daniel's moral obligation, and a wife who had overreacted to a situation she didn't fully understand. I sat through it with my hands folded and my expression neutral. Then Patricia presented ours. She was methodical, exhibit by exhibit. The photographs, the financial records, the lease in Sandra's name with Daniel's money, the birth certificate, Ms. Trotter's report on the state of the basement, the baby monitor, which Patricia noted had been accessed remotely from Daniel's phone on the evening of the night in question. The cell data confirmed he had been monitoring the feed from 3 hours away, meaning he had known the child was alone in the basement when he left. That one landed. Judge Buckley looked at the exhibit for a long moment. Then she looked at Daniel. "Counsel," she said to Garrett Phelps, "does your client dispute the cell data showing remote access to the monitoring device?" Phelps conferred with Daniel in a low voice. Daniel shook his head. "No, Your Honor," Phelps said. "So your client acknowledges he was monitoring a toddler remotely from 3 hours away while that child was unaccompanied in a basement?" He would characterize. "I'm asking for acknowledgement of the fact, counsel, not characterization." There was a pause. "Yes, Your Honor." That was the moment. I felt it in the room. The quality of the air changing, the particular silence that falls when something irreversible has been said. Phelps tried to recover. He pivoted to the financial complexity argument, that the money Daniel had moved was in support of his minor child, which had emotional and arguably moral legitimacy. Patricia countered cleanly with the marital fraud statute and the pattern of deception. Judge Buckley took notes. Then Sandra Voss testified. I had not known what to expect from Sandra. She was younger than me. 33, I had learned, which meant she'd been 29 when she met Daniel. She was small and dark-haired, and she had Leo's eyes, or rather, Leo had hers. She sat in the witness chair, and she spoke in a flat, controlled voice about what her arrangement with Daniel had actually been. She had been told and had believed that Daniel was separated from his wife and in the process of divorce. She had been told this for 3 years. She had found out the truth the same week I had, when Patricia's paralegal contacted her. She had not known Leo was being brought to our basement. She had believed he was at Daniel's rented apartment when she needed time away. When Patricia asked her whether she had consented to her son being placed in the basement of a home belonging to Daniel's legal wife, Sandra's voice didn't waver. No, she said, I did not. Daniel's composure broke in stages. First, a muscle in his jaw. Then, a tap of his finger against the table, once, twice, a tell I recognized from 10 years of Sunday crosswords. Then, a low, urgent exchange with Phelps that the court reporter was clearly catching. Then, finally, when Sandra finished and Phelps stood to cross-examine and asked her whether she had in fact benefited financially from her relationship with Daniel, a question designed to undercut her credibility by implying complicity, Sandra looked at him with an expression I will never forget. I benefited, she said, from being deceived. That's not the same thing. Daniel said, audibly. That's not what she... and caught himself. Too late. Judge Buckley raised her eyes. Mr. Calloway, she said, with a quiet authority that did not require volume, you will not speak during testimony. Daniel subsided, but the damage was done. Everyone in that room had heard him start a sentence he couldn't finish. I sat in my chair and looked at my hands and thought, it's done. Not because the hearing was the end. It wasn't. There would be more proceedings. But because the story had been fully told, in public, in front of a judge, on the record. The architecture of the lie had been laid out, wall by wall, and there was no version of the truth he could now offer that would hold together. After the hearing, in the corridor, I passed Daniel on the way out. He looked at me for the first time that day. He didn't speak. Neither did I. There was nothing left to say. Judge Buckley issued her preliminary findings 6 weeks after the hearing, and Patricia called me the morning the document arrived with a tone in her voice I hadn't heard from her before. Something close to satisfaction. The findings were comprehensive. On the matter of marital fraud, sustained. The court found a documented pattern of financial deception over a period of not less than 3 years and 2 months, constituting grounds for an adverse financial settlement. On the matter of the joint assets, the marital home was awarded to me in full, with Daniel's equity claim voided on grounds of financial misconduct. The $47,000 moved from our joint savings, the money used to finance the Clintonville apartment and Sandra's rent, was to be repaid to me in full as part of the settlement, structured as a lien against Daniel's future earnings. On the matter of spousal support, awarded for a period of 4 years, given my reduced income capacity during a decade in which I had structured my freelance work around a marriage that proved fraudulent. Daniel's attorney had argued for division of the mortgage debt. The judge denied it. There was also the matter of children's services. Their report, submitted to the court, documented the basement living arrangement as contrary to the best interests of the minor child, and noted the lack of maternal consent as a significant concern. Daniel's parental rights were not terminated. He was Leo's father. and barring evidence of abuse, termination was not appropriate. But his custody arrangement was placed under supervised visitation, pending a full evaluation. He would not be taking Leo to any basement anytime soon, or anywhere else unsupervised. Sandra Voss received separate findings in her own proceedings. Full primary custody of Leo, child support, calculated on Daniel's salary, and obligatory on first of the month. Her attorney had done solid work. I thought about Leo. I thought about him often. I hoped he was all right. That small, serious boy with the fire truck onesie and the cracker in each hand. He was too young to understand what had happened, which was its own kind of mercy. Daniel's response to the findings was to appeal. Garrett Phelps filed within the deadline, citing procedural objections and disputing the fraud characterization. Patricia read me the appeal over the phone, and then she said, "It will fail." "How certain are you?" I asked. "The financial forensics alone are sufficient," she said. "He spent marital funds on a parallel household. That's not ambiguous." She paused. "He knows it will fail too. The appeal is theater. It's the last thing he can do." The appeal was denied 4 months later. What followed was not a single dramatic moment. There was no scene of Daniel standing in a courtroom receiving a verdict while I watched with crossed arms. Real victory is more administrative than that. It was a series of documents, signatures, a title transfer on the house, a bank account uncoupled from his name, a final dissolution decree on a Tuesday afternoon that Patricia emailed to me as a PDF. I sat at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, in my house, and opened the file and read it through from beginning to end. Biscuit was sleeping under the table. The afternoon sun was coming through the east windows the way it always did at this hour. I had been in this kitchen the morning I'd heard Leo crying. I had been in this kitchen when Daniel slammed the door. I had been in this kitchen when his mother set a casserole on the counter and told me, with great tenderness, to be a better kind of woman. Now I was here alone, in the quiet, with a document that said this chapter was finished. I didn't feel triumphant exactly. Triumph implies a victory you wanted, a prize you were chasing. I hadn't wanted any of this. I had wanted a marriage that was real, a partner who was honest, a life that was what it appeared to be. None of that had been given to me. What I had instead was the house and the settlement and my own unaltered integrity, and the knowledge that when the worst thing happened, I had not flinched. That, I decided, was enough. More than enough. I closed the laptop, put the kettle on, and looked out the window at the yard. Biscuit's tail was thumping against my foot. It was a Tuesday in autumn. The maple in the backyard had gone orange overnight. I had nowhere to be until my design client call at 3. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the house felt like mine. The year that followed was the first year in a long time that felt entirely mine. I renovated the sunroom. I tore out the cheap blinds and put in proper curtains, moved my desk to face the garden, bought a second-hand armchair for the corner. I repainted the walls a warm ivory that Daniel had always called impractical. The design work expanded. Freed from the low-grade anxiety embedded in my every working hour, I found I was faster, sharper, more willing to pitch for larger projects. By the following spring, I had taken on 2 retainer clients and hired a part-time assistant named Amara, who had strong opinions about typefaces and was always right. The income, combined with the spousal support payments, gave me more financial stability than I had known in the marriage, partly because money was no longer quietly disappearing. I kept going to Donna's Thursday group for the better part of a year, not because I needed it toward the end, but because those women had given me something unexpected, a model for what rebuilding actually looks like from the inside. Karen went back to school for a nurse practitioner degree at 46. Phyllis learned to sail on Lake Erie with her adult daughters. Rose, who barely spoke for 3 months, eventually laughed so hard at something, Donna said that she had to hold the edge of the table. In the late fall of that second year, I met a man named Thomas at a gallery opening. He was a high school history teacher, divorced 4 years prior, with a dry humor and a habit of arriving at parties, already planning his exit strategy. We talked for 2 hours in front of a painting neither of us liked. Slowly, something became, without either of us announcing it, a relationship. It was so different from what I had known that I occasionally didn't recognize it as the same category of thing. He said what he meant. He had no basement. He had, as far as I could tell, only the single life he presented. I introduced him to Biscuit first, as a test. Biscuit approved. As for Daniel, the appeal failed. The financial lien became active, and he had to liquidate part of his retirement account to cover the initial repayment. He lost his logistics position the following spring. The proceedings had become known in his professional network, which is a small world. He found work again, eventually, at a lower level and salary. The lien took a portion of each paycheck on schedule. Sandra Voss moved to a suburb east of Columbus, where her parents lived, and was raising Leo close to family. He was nearly 4 now, apparently thriving, very serious about trucks. That made me smile. Through Patricia, Sandra had asked to convey something. Not formally, just person to person. She was sorry. Not for anything between us because neither of us had wronged the other. For the fact that it had happened at all. I sent back 2 sentences. I understand. I hope Leo grows up knowing he was never the problem. Patricia said Sandra read it and nodded. The maple in the backyard turned orange again that fall. I sat on the back porch with Thomas and a bottle of wine, Biscuit stretched across both our feet, the evening coming down over the yard, quiet, ordinary, entirely mine. You okay? Thomas asked. Yes, I said and meant it completely. I used to think trust meant never questioning. Now I know it means staying honest with yourself, even when the truth is the hardest door to open. When I finally walked down those stairs, I wasn't brave. I was simply done being afraid of what I might find. Here's what I learned. Secrets kept in the dark don't stay there forever. And the woman who breaks the lock doesn't lose the house. She earns it. What would you have done? Would you have taken the deal? Would you have walked away? Tell me in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more to come. Thank you for listening.